In the duel in the Senate chambers, Yoda fell a great height and landed on the floor. Though he had been disarmed, he had not been killed, and very much still could have gotten up and continued the fight against Sidious. He had gone in with the singular goal of destroying the Sith, and yet he himself said that he had failed. So rather than find his lightsaber and resume the fight for the soul of the galaxy, Yoda fled. In the duel, Yoda had been given an epiphany, one that is laid out in great detail in the Revenge of the Sith novel. It was in this moment when Yoda pierced through the very veil of the dark side and saw the truth of what was occurring. He had absolutely no hope of victory, and it wasn't a matter of skill, but a matter of destiny. In that moment, the Force had one message for the Grand Master. That message was run. Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. In today's Holocron, we are going to explore the real reason why Yoda decided to flee from Sidious, rather than get back up and finish the duel. In this process, we will discover the deep meaning behind the will of the Force during the galaxy's darkest hour, and how Yoda finally pierced the veil. The duel between Yoda and Sidious was so much more than a clash of lightsabers or a show of Force mastery. It was two avatars of their respective alignments clashing in the greatest deathmatch in galactic history. It was all the power and the soul of the Jedi battling the spirit of the Sith. Two embodiments of their respective orders giving it their all in one climactic showdown that has been 1,000 years in the making. At least, that is how Yoda saw it when he first walked into Palpatine's office. Before his realization, upon learning that Palpatine was the Sith, and that he had turned the Chosen One and become the Emperor, Yoda told Obi-Wan one thing: destroy the Sith we must. As far as they were aware, they were the last of the Jedi. While many Jedi did survive Order 66, or completely out of commission, Obi-Wan had already sent out a message warning all surviving Jedi to stay away from Coruscant, and Yoda didn't know if he and Obi-Wan were the last two Jedi alive in the entire galaxy. But nevertheless, the point was the same. No one responded to their call, so the Jedi were on their own. The heart of the Republic was theirs to defend, and they needed to act quickly. Obi-Wan would face his own pupil and defeat him, a task that Yoda was confident Kenobi could handle. But the mission that laid before the Grand Master would place the weight of the entire galaxy's future upon his small shoulders. Yoda was the only one that was remotely powerful enough to face Sidious. There was no time to debate it. Yoda needed to take him alone. The Grand Master, not yet willing to call himself the former Grand Master, walked with great confidence and bravado into Palpatine's office. But the Sith Lord quickly showed him that his arrogance did indeed blind him. This was something that Yoda too had realized midway through the Clone Wars. He had begun to see what Qui-Gon Jinn had said, that the Jedi had been correct about the state of the galaxy, the Jedi, and the Republic. The Jedi had neglected the will of the living Force. They had become far too dogmatic, blindly serving a system that was fundamentally flawed, unstable. All Yoda wanted to do was end the Clone Wars as quickly as possible, and hope to repair the Jedi Order after. He was far too late for both of this though, and his training with the Force and the priestesses had shown him something clear. Yoda had developed his own attachment. Yoda's was the Jedi Order. He lost everyone that he cared about, all the little Jedi that he had considered to be his own children. But due to him overcoming this fear at the wellspring of life, Yoda was able to steel his resolve, and he chose to fight Sidious with the light side of the Force and the determination of a Jedi Grand Master. He would not be swayed by tragedy. He would remain serving the part of the Force that had always given him victory, and he believed that it would repeat itself again. But Sidious would prove to be a kind of challenge that he had never encountered before. Each blow from the Dark Lord made Yoda's old body creak in pain. The dark side was more overwhelming than it had ever been before. He had managed to disarm the Emperor, but he soon found himself facing a storm of dark side fury, equivalent to the force of nature itself. Yoda was indeed powerful, and yes, he continued trying his best and hardest to have a chance to overcome the Emperor. But to defeat Palpatine here was not the will of the Force. Over the course of the duel, Yoda sank more and more deeply into the light. And finally, he had a breakthrough. Not a breakthrough in the battle where he managed to get an advantage over the enemy, but rather a breakthrough in his mind, and a breakthrough of the veil that had been laid over the Force. The machinations of Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious that had clouded the Jedi for years at this point. Yoda finally broke free, and Yoda finally saw the truth. But it was not some grand realization of power, insight, and salvation. It was worse. There came a turning point in the clash of light against the dark. It did not come from a flash of lightning or slash of an energy blade, though there were these in plenty. It did not come from a flying kick or a surgically precise punch, though those too were traded. It came as the battle shifted from the holding office to the Great Chancellor's podium. It came as the hydraulic lift beneath the podium raised it on its tower of durasteel 100 meters and more. It became as a laser point of battle flaring at the focus of the vast emptiness of the Senate arena. It came as the Force and the podium's controls ripped delegation pods free of the curving walls and made use of them as hammers, as battering rams, catapult stones, crashing and crushing against each other in a rolling thunder roar that echoed the Senate's cheers for the galaxy's new emperor. It came when the Avatar of the Light resolved into the lineage of the Jedi, when the lineage of the Jedi refined into one single Jedi. It came when Yoda found himself alone against the dark. In that lightning-speared tornado of feet and fists and blades and bashing machines, Yoda's vision finally pierced the darkness that had clouded the Force. Finally, Yoda saw the truth. This truth, that he, the Avatar of the Light, the Supreme Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He had lost before it had ever started. He had lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown. They'd adapted, invested 1,000 years intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force, but Jedi lore itself, in preparation for exactly this day. The Sith had remade themselves. They had become anew, while the Jedi had spent the same millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber. They could not be burned away by any torch of the Force. The brighter his light, the darker their shadow. How could one win a war against the dark when the war itself had become the dark's own weapon? He knew at that instant that this insight held the hope of the galaxy. But if Yoda fell here, that hope would die with him. Yoda thought. A problem this is. In this operatic description of their duel, Yoda's vision at last pierces the veil of the dark, the same veil that is the one that Sidious threw over the side of the Jedi as early as Attack of the Clones. The Jedi Council came to realize that most of them were unable to see the future anymore. Even Mace Windu's Shatterpoint ability was now limited. This was a power which allowed him to perceive fault lines within a moment in time. This meant that he was able to sense when people, places, or even events had important turning points in history. Mace could trace a single fracture of time to its source, and determine that something or someone would alter time forever. This ability extended to perceiving weak points in structures, or even an enemy's fighting style. But with the veil of the dark side over his vision, Windu had a difficult time perceiving exactly what the Shatterpoints were telling him. He still perceived them, but their meanings were vague and misty. But Windu at least had more than most Jedi. The dark side began to cloud everything to the point where Jedi seers were basically useless, and not even Yoda could look into the future to determine whether a situation spelled fortune or doom. As the war progressed, it got to the point where only those who submitted themselves to the dark side could pierce this veil. Pong Krell perceived that a new order was coming to the galaxy, and he wanted to be a part of it. Maul saw the same thing closer to the end of the war, and even figured out that Anakin Skywalker was the key. Yoda was shown what he needed to overcome on Dagobah, at the Wellspring of Life, two locations which rested a powerful vergence in the Force. Yoda did not believe the future was set in stone, but he believed this was an omen of warning, now hoping that he could change the Jedi to resist the dark side, rather than looking for the dark side within the Republic. How could one win a war against the dark when the war itself had become the dark's weapon? The answer is the exact answer that Yoda comes to stop fighting. What the Force was trying to show him is that Yoda no longer had destiny to swing a lightsaber, to conquer the dark side by defeating Sidious here. He got back up, and he was sent falling a long way, but his body ached, his stamina passed its limits, and he realized that the Sith had truly won. But Yoda makes a decision. Yoda puts aside the Jedi dogma that he said would destroy the Sith, but it could also destroy the Jedi. He laid down the arrogance that the Jedi could protect the Republic. He put it all aside, and he listened to Qui-Gon. He listened to the Force. And the Force told him that his role was not to be a general or a warrior. He fought a good fight, but he must fight no longer. Yoda needed to flee, not out of fear, but because he had the knowledge and hope of the future. A hope that would not allow him to selfishly die. Yes, when he speaks to Bail, he must go into exile and that he had failed. But I don't believe that he's saying that he failed to kill Palpatine, or even failed to protect the Republic. Yoda failed because he hadn't pierced the veil yet. He hadn't had this realization sooner. He failed because he allowed the dogma and superiority of the Jedi to blind his sight. And by continuing to fight, he had become the very weapon of the Sith. Yoda would need to go into exile and wait for a new hope, and when that happened, he would listen to the will of the Force again and would train him. When Luke arrived, Yoda tested him by being intentionally irritating, and when he saw the boy's lack of patience, Yoda became afraid. He saw a lot of Anakin in Luke, but he was reminded by Obi-Wan of the promise that he made to vow to never fail to listen to the Force again, a promise made to the Force. This is why he didn't return to lead the rebellion or have a rematch with Sidious. It's exactly what Palpatine would expect from him, simply repeating the same mistakes of the Jedi of the past. But Yoda knew that he couldn't possibly win this way. That line of thought needed to die, and it was time to be a mentor, a guiding hand, rather than a warrior. Yoda perfectly characterizes this shift in thought when he tells Luke, "War does not make one great." And so, my friends, that is why Yoda ran away from Sidious. After we did a full breakdown of this duel a while back, there were many who said that Yoda definitely could have gotten back up and should have been able to defeat Palpatine. But whether or not this is true, this isn't ultimately the point. Maybe he could have gotten back up, but his power and his lightsaber would have only played into Sidious's game, his weapon. And even if Yoda won, the soul of the Jedi had been eradicated. The galaxy turned against them. Their time was over. Even if Sidious and Vader both perished, it did not change the fact that the light had almost completely been stamped out, and that the galaxy hated the Jedi. It was a time of patience, peace, healing, realignment with the will of the living Force. This was the message that the Force finally delivered to Yoda: to run, not out of cowardice, but out of hope. But anyway, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel and the archives here today. And I too hope that you are having a phenomenal day. May the Force be with you.